Hey there everyone, and welcome to the channel. Over 5 months ago, I released a prelude to my Ace Attorney Investigations 2 retrospective series. And those who've been following me since that video are probably wondering, what has become of the series? Why has it been so long since then, with no update or tease being released over these past 5 months? I won't keep you waiting, so I'll get to the chase. Aside juggling with work and college, I've been busy working on multiple scripts for multiple video projects, and would spend more time brainstorming new ideas for videos rather than focus on one singular video. Over time, I realized that many of the videos that I plan on making will have to be very long, which will make them hard to produce. Writing good scripts, including for this one, takes patience and persistence, and that's not even including the editing phase. And it goes without saying, but I realized that it's ultimately better to focus on one thing at a time for a more consistent upload rate. Obviously, I'm operating a really tiny channel and I don't expect it to grow anytime soon, so don't expect frequent and consistent uploads, but I do have a reason to make the Ace Attorney Investigations 2 series. I have yet to find someone who truly doesn't like this game, but my goal is not to spark a hate train surrounding it. I would like to encourage discussions so that we can better understand titles that have a great deal of clout behind them. Speaking of discussion, before I announce what's currently in development, I would like to take the time to talk about something that's been kinda bothering me in the Ace Attorney fandom. Not that the fans are bad, or that they're completely wrong for saying the following statement, but I do have major issues with said statement and those who spout it ever so religiously. Capcom must localize AAI2. Capcom must localize AAI2. Where do I even begin with this? As a Japan-only title, it's definitely understandable for fans to feel left out over their favorite game. But I think it's important to first explain why Capcom won't localize GK2 even after all these years. I went over this briefly in the prelude, but when AAI2 was released on February 3 of 2011, narrative-based games such as RPGs, visual novels, and adventure games were getting overshadowed by an overabundance of first-person shooters and platformers. Some of which are really good, yes, but the fact still stands that the time wasn't friendly to those genres. I previously used Ace Attorney and Fire Emblem to prove my point, over how unpopular those genres were in the West at the time. New Mystery of the Emblem was essentially the Fire Emblem counterpart to GK2. Their predecessors sold like trash, and even Capcom saw how poorly the first Investigations game sold relative to the Gyakuten Saiban series, which sold decently. So they made the same decision as Intelligent Systems, to make the next game a Japan-only title. New Mystery of the Emblem was released in mid-2010, and GK2 was released in early 2011, which is less than a year apart. It took until 2012 and 2013, respectively, for both franchises to receive their next anticipated releases, both of which were commercial successes. Ace Attorney, with the advent of the trilogy re-release, is finally becoming more popular, which gave Capcom a good incentive to localize some of the greatest games in the series. Those being the Gyakuten Saiban Duology, which had been Japan exclusive for almost 4 years since DGS2, 6 years since DGS1. Now naturally, I am very hyped to finally get my hands on the Great Ace Attorney Duology, but right from the very beginning, when it was all leaked in 2020, fans worried that AAI2 would be left in the dust. And the reason why I pulled us all the way from the dark age of Fire Emblem to this glorious GAA reveal is because GK2 is officially 10 years old now, and is still Japan exclusive to this day, which is a good argument on the angry fans' part. This has caused fans to despise Capcom for choosing DGS only because it's more relevant. The crazy part about all this is that what sparked this statement was the advent of the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, as although Investigations 2 was a game fans always wanted to have an official release, it didn't get quite so vocal until 2020, to the point where fans seemed to express animosity, at least indirectly, to the DGS Duology for being the chosen child for adoption over GK2, which was stuck in an orphanage for over 10 years. Again, it seemed understandable at first glance that GK2 may be on the short end of the stick, but there are many objections I have for this argument. The first thing I want to point out is that GK2 has been out for only 3 years until it received a full-fledged translation by fans in 2014, as opposed to DGS, which has never been fully translated by the fan team behind it, Scarlet Study. While Scarlet Study did successfully translate DGS-1, they only managed to complete the first 2 cases in DGS-2, not even half the game, before suddenly aborting the project without completing it. Likely because Capcom was already working on the official translation at the time. Now, a fan translation is pretty pointless when a game is already getting an official translation, so DGS2's translation being left behind by the fan team is not necessarily an issue since Capcom is already doing the work for the fans in the form of the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles. My point is, there is no need to be so bitter towards the DGS Duology when GK2 has already been fully translated long before the DGS Duology ever was. We in the West essentially had to wait for 5 years at the Spirit of Justice just to get the full package of a new release, which to the Japanese isn't even anything new. Like, just think about how they feel. Now I know what you're thinking. This person claims I hate DGS, which isn't true at all. Well, I'm not necessarily saying that GK2 fans hate DGS per se, just that they're overlooking multiple different factors in their bias. First, related to the point I brought up before, DGS1's fan translation was completed in 2019, 4 years after its original release, as opposed to GK2's fan translation being finished in 2014, 3 years after its original release. That's just a minor thing. Second, the DGS Duology is unique to the series where the first game ends on a giant cliffhanger, and the fact that the second game was not being fully translated only exacerbated this issue for Western players, since the 2017 entry essentially ties up all loose ends from its 2015 predecessor. I know I'm making it sound like I played through DGS2 where it's coming out in only a matter of days, but I've only played DGS1, so I can at least tell you that DGS1 did end with such a cliffhanger. So ultimately the DGS Duology was never fully fan translated to begin with. We only got half from them, and the rest is coming from Capcom itself. This is in stark opposition to GK2, which was never localized by Capcom but had been fully translated by a fan team, which essentially means that an official release for GK2 is not really needed, unless there are some self-limiting conditions fans impose on themselves, which we'll get to later. GK2 fans have this interesting philosophy where if a game is not translated officially, then it's somehow a bad thing. Like, let's be real here. Why do Western fans think GK2 is a good game in the first place? Did they take the time to learn Japanese and play the JP version? Heck no. Most people obviously picked up the fan translation, hailing GK2 as the greatest game in the series upon playing it. GK2's fame came from the fan translation, so this notion that it needs an official translation is overly demanding in nature. It's like they think that the game they love so much, the game that they so-called perfect, as it is in the fan-translated version, would somehow be improved by an official translation. By that point, you're disrespecting the hard work of the fans who translated the game, and if you're going to argue that I think GK2 is poorly written, and that I should be blaming the fans for poor translation, I'm going to say no to that, because the translation is very well done. It's the original Japanese kanji where the problems lie. Unless the script would get a rework, an official translation will net you almost the same result. Maybe it's just me, but I tend to go with the philosophy of, if it's playable, then it's ready. I'm going to use this example as somewhat of a stretch, but every single Fire Emblem game before Fire Emblem 7 in 2003 has not been localized outside of Japan. And I played the fan translations for all of them, save for Fire Emblems 1 and 3, the former of which has an official translation in the form of Shadow Dragon, and the latter which, by the way, is also a Japan-exclusive game, meaning that Marsh's second book never reached the West. And I only have the fans behind the Heroes of Shadow to thank for allowing me to play Fire Emblem 12 without any problems. You see, fan translations are essential to series like Ace Attorney and Fire Emblem, which often fall out of favor in certain metas. The fact I'm more than thankful to have a fan translation for Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, while GK2 fans are crying about the Great Ace Attorney being localized over GK2 is ridiculous because it implies that they are not even thankful for what they already have. Okay, one last point. Why do fans try finding excuses to justify this statement? One excuse is whether you're willing to give Capcom money for an Ace Attorney game, believing that playing GK2 using the fan translation is committing piracy. Just play Your Turn to Die and you'll see that you don't need to spend money on a high-quality video game, let alone a visual novel. Which begs the question, do any GK2 fans use this excuse? Because surely there's no way they could know without seeing someone else play it, where they could still read the spoken dialogue or, quote, pirating it, unquote, to play it for themselves. The one that really bothers me is the notion that GK2 is so great that it would be nice to have an official translation. Well, good luck blaming the fans for that invisible reduced quality, because I don't need Nintendo to localize Fire Emblem Binding Blade or Starfy GBA if I can play the fan-translated versions just fine. Look, I'm not against GK2 getting localized sometime in the future, but what I am saying is that the DGS Duology needed one far more, mainly because Scarlet Study failed to fully translate the Duology. Not to mention, we should actually appreciate the hard work of the fans who translated GK2 for us all the way back in 2014. So that's essentially what I wanted to talk about today. Let me know what you think in the comments about this topic. I'll be happy to have a constructive debate if you have any objections. For now, it's sneak peek time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you then.